Welcome to the Wayne Public Library's virtual author chat with Nancy Herkness. Nancy is the award-winning author of The Consultants, Wager of Hearts, and Whisper Horse series, published by Montlake Romance, as well as several other contemporary romance novels. She is a two-time nominee for the Romance Writers of America's Rita Award. Nancy has received many honors for her work, including the Book Buyer's Best Top Pick, the New England Reader's Choice Award, and the National Excellence in Romance Fiction Award. She recently won a Maggie Award for the Best Contemporary Romance for The Money Man, and she is a finalist in the New Jersey Romance Writers Golden Leaf Awards for the Best Book by a New Jersey Author and Best Mid-Length Contemporary Novel for The Hacker. She graduated from Princeton University with a degree in English Literature and Creative Writing. A native of West Virginia, Nancy now lives 12 miles west of the Lincoln Tunnel in suburban New Jersey with 2 tabby cats. Welcome, Nancy. Please tell us a little more about yourself and your new novel.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and it's so great to see so many friendly faces. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm not sure there's a whole lot more to say about myself after that great introduction. My latest release is The Agent, which is the 3rd book in the Consultants series. And we'll be talking a little more about that later, right? So I won't belabor that point. But Janette, ask me all those wonderful questions.
You've written several series. Is it difficult to keep continuity with all the storylines and characters in each series? And do you prefer writing series or standalone novels?
Oh, yes. It's actually really hard to keep track of all the storylines and characters. And if I were an organized writer, I would create what's called a series Bible, where you actually keep track of, you know, character name, what color are their eyes, what color is their hair, where do they first appear? But that would require being an organized writer, and I'm not. I always start with a series Bible, and then I don't keep it up to date. That said, the series that I'm working on now, the new book that I'm working on now, is going to be a much bigger series, and it has a much larger cast of characters. So I have done a series Bible for that, and I'm actually keeping it up. I've got characters, I've got places because I'm building a fictional country, and I've even got the local flora and fauna. So I'm being incredibly organized, and we'll see how long that lasts. But so far, I'm doing pretty well. And your question about do I prefer series to standalone is, yes, I actually do prefer series. And the main reason is that I feel like I get to know the characters so much better when I get to follow them through multiple books. By like the 3rd book, I feel like I've got them totally by heart, and I know, you know, all their quirks and ins and outs, and I've really hit my stride. And it gets really exciting when that happens. And I almost, you know, by the 3rd book, I almost don't need the series Bible because I know them so well. Now, except for like timeline. Timeline is a huge problem for me. I had one book where, thank God the editor caught this, there was a little girl in the book. This was in Shower of Stars. And she went to school 10 days in a row because I hadn't figured out what day of the week it was. I was like, oops, yep, she went to school Saturday and Sunday too. Oh, well. So we had to fix that.
Okay. Well, you've mentioned what you're currently working on, which I'm going to skip ahead to a future question and ask, well, what are you currently working on? On your website, you mentioned a new series set in a fictional island off the coast of Spain.
Yes. So this is kind of a new adventure for me. During the pandemic, Shirley and I were just talking about this. I found it very hard to write. And for about 8 months, I didn't write anything. And instead, I read just voraciously, only I found that I was not reading romance. I was reading science fiction and fantasy because I think I just needed to get off this planet, you know, like completely off this planet. And I got really intrigued by the world building. And I've always wanted to do world building, but I do not want to write science fiction or fantasy. So I decided I'm going to create my own country. And I'm going to set a lot of books there because if I'm going to the trouble of creating my own country, I want to use it a lot. So I have been having so much fun creating this island off the coast of Spain. It's about 800 miles off the coast of Spain. It's got a Spanish accent because the Spanish sailors settled it first, But there's a French region as well, because, you know, nice little conflict there, sort of like Canada, you know, where the French and the English speakers don't quite get along. So, and conflict, of course, is great for books. And I gave them geothermal power, so there's no pollution. I created Calavan lilies, which have medicinal powers that are extremely valuable and make the country quite wealthy, and also creates a bit of a power struggle. And then thanks to Elke reminded me that I like dragons, because when she heard I was writing about a fictional island, she sent me postcards from the Jersey Islands off of England, which was really fun. And one of them she sent me was from the zoo there. And it was this card of a plumed basilisk. And she reminded me how much I love dragons, but I don't write fantasy, so I've never been able to put dragons in my book. But I thought, if I'm inventing a country, I can invent the flora and fauna as well. So we have Calavan dragons on my island. Now, they're not literal dragons. They're large lizards, like a Komodo dragon, except they have the frill. You've seen frilled lizards where they can put that sort of great frill out. So they're frilled dragons. They are the symbol of the monarchy, because this is a country with a constitutional monarchy. And if you see a Calavan dragon, because they're quite rare, you have the luck of the dragon for the rest of the day. So as you can see, I'm just playing. I'm just having the best time playing. And I'm almost finished with the first book in the series. I have at least 6 books. When I say planned, that's a loose term. There are 6 sets of characters I want to write about. So, and with the opportunity for many more. And this has got me so jazzed up, because, you know, I introduce a lot of them in this book, like King Louis IV, the Crown Prince Raoul, Michael da Silva is the king's head of security. I want to write about all of those people. So, you know, they're going to have their own books. So I'm just like vibrating, can you tell, with excitement about this. It's just so much fun. So sorry, I'll stop talking about that now.
No, that sounds wonderful. Sounds actually very exciting. Just the world building. I can't imagine what the story is going to be like, all those stories. So I look forward to that. Back to the agent. Can you share something about the agent that isn't in the blurb?
Okay, so I was thinking about this. I really wanted to share something that happens at the end, but I realized that was kind of a spoiler, so I decided not to do that. So what I want to share is a sort of fun factoid about the agent. Tully, the hero, is a former FBI agent and a security expert. And when I needed to give him a house in Manhattan, I decided to give him a house that actually exists. So if you have read the book, Tully lives in this magnificent mansion on the Upper West Side, and it's actually this Skinazi Mansion. It's the only freestanding home still in private hands in Manhattan, 12,000 square feet. I discovered it because I had lunch with a friend on the Upper West Side, and we just went out for a walk afterwards, and we walked by this house that I'm like, oh my God, it's on a corner, and it literally doesn't, I mean, you know, in Manhattan, everything touches something else. It's completely freestanding. I was just fascinated by this. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it's famous, you know, it's historic, all that kind of stuff. And so then I found pictures. I took a lot of pictures of the outside, but then I found pictures of the interior. And in the grand entrance hall, there's a piano, which seems to sort of come with the house. And since Tully bought the house because he could afford it, of course, and because it was freestanding, so he could control all the access to it for security reasons, just because that's how he thinks. But he's like a self-made man from rural Pennsylvania, so it's a little grand for him. And he just took the furniture that came with it. And one of the things was this grand piano. And there is a scene in the book that I really enjoyed writing where he and Natalie find a use for the grand piano that has nothing to do with playing it.
Okay. Okay, thanks. That sounds like something fun. Like, definitely want to read it.
Oh, good.
Is there a character in this book or any of your books that you think of as your favorite?
Well, you know, I have all my books around me, and I really shouldn't say this because you always feel like you're going to hurt their feelings. It's like being a parent where you're supposed to love all your children equally, right? But in fact, probably one of my favorite books is my first one, A Bridge to Love. because I wrote this without having a contract, without having an agent, without knowing really very much about the publishing industry at all. And so I wrote it just for myself. And Randall Johnson, the hero of the book, I wrote just for me. I mean, he's my hero, right? So he will always have a special place in my heart. And I think in a lot of readers' hearts. I've heard from other readers that they really like Randall. And then the other book that I love, the main character is the VIP Doubles Down, because he's a writer. Stephanie loves him too. Gavin Miller, not only is he he's a writer with writer's block. And of course, that is like the worst nightmare of any writer. And he's very grumpy about it. And I just loved him. So he was a lot of fun to write. And of course, the other thing that's great about Gavin is that he's really grumpy and cynical, but he's a romantic at heart. And this is the third book in the Wager of Hearts series. And he actually match makes in his own cynical way in the first two books. So I thought it was kind of fun having him, you know, be that romantic when he's such a difficult person, and so sort of seems so jaded. And he's under tremendous pressure to produce this book because he's a best-selling author, and they make movies of all his books, and they're waiting to make the next movie. So he's really in a bad place in this book. And of course, torturing your characters is half the fun of being a writer. So I love that. So those are my two favorites.
Okay, a romantic curmudgeon is what it
yes, exactly.
called him. So I have to go back to your early days, since you just brought up your two books, the first one you wrote. What inspired you to start writing?
I think probably the same thing that inspires a lot of people. I've always loved reading romance, and I was commuting to the city. I won't even tell you what decade it was in because that will date me, but it was a while ago, shall we say. And I kind of ran out of books that I wanted to read. I kept looking for another romance that I would like to read, and I was having a hard time finding them. And so being a writer, I said, you know, not a romance writer, but a writer. I said, heck with this. I'm going to write the kind of book I want to read. And that's what I sat down to do the first time. I loved Georgette Heyer, who writes Regency romances. But I decided not to try and do historicals because I admire tremendously people who write historicals, because all that damn research you have to do. And if you get it wrong, what do your readers tell you? Geez. So I was like, okay, I can't do that. And also I just thought, you know, I don't want to try and compete with Georgette Heyer. That would be really hard. So I decided to write a contemporary, and the rest is kind of history. Although that first book that I wrote, oh my God, so bad. I made every mistake you could possibly make in a first book. So yeah, it's gone. No one will ever read that book.
So that is that one of the ones that came before the first one that you actually had published?
Yes, that was the one before A Bridge to Love, you know. So yeah, that was my learning book, my you know, get all the bad stuff out of my system book.
And did you take any of the characters from that one and kind of build on them? Or do you ever see yourself going back and rewriting that one now?
No, that one's history. There's so much wrong with that book that it's just not even salvageable, honestly. Although weirdly enough, I did get an editor interested in it at one point, although she wanted me to do major rewrites. She wanted me to make the characters older because they evidently, I've forgotten who it was now. Were starting a line with older characters, but I had just had a baby and I was like, I just can't, you know. Looking back, I wish I had, but I was overwhelmed.
And I as I read in your bio, that your background is in English literature and creative writing, and I read that your senior thesis was a book of original poetry.
That is true. It was. I still have that. I still have my senior thesis. It's not as bad as my first romance novel was, but close. I love poetry. I still read a lot of poetry. And I've always felt that my training as a poet in the creative writing program at Princeton actually was really useful for writing commercial fiction, because it teaches you to be, what's the word? Well, number one, it's good for romance because it's all about emotion, right? You're trying to convey intense emotion in poetry. That's really what you're going for. And you do it with image, and it also has to be pithy. I mean, everything has to do like triple duty in poetry, and I feel like that's kind of what you need to do in commercial fiction, because you don't have a lot of time to, you know, we can't be Henry James and spend 3 pages describing one room. We have to nail it in like one sentence, and that's kind of what poetry does. It's very condensed, right? So I've always felt my training in poetry has stood me in good stead for writing commercial fiction.
Wow. That's,
I know that sounds weird.
I never think about, you know, poetry, you know, teaching you to write commercial fiction, but I kind of see that, the condensed aspect of it. Have you ever, many authors will start a chapter with like a quote or a poem or even a book. Have you ever thought of like starting one with your own original poetry?
No, definitely not. I might borrow someone else's, but I am not putting my poetry in there.
Okay. And how many books have you written in total?
Well, I've published 17 books. I mentioned the one that I wrote before, and then I've written a couple of other books that did not get published, but I kind of cannibalized them for books that did get published. So I don't really, unfortunately, have any, like, we call them books under the bed that you can pull out and sort of publish when you need to. Alas, I don't have any of those. I wish I did. I'm a very slow writer. Well, I'm slow compared to a lot of writers today. You know, in the old days, I was a perfectly normal speed writer. You know, I could write a book and a novella a year, and now people are writing 4, 5, 6 books in a year, which just boggles my mind. So, you know, I wish I had under the bed books. It would be nice, but nope. So I think I've written probably 3 more books than I've published, maybe.
Okay. And what is the most difficult part about writing for you?
Starting the book. So I know you have a question for me about whether I'm a pantser or a plotter, but I'm going to ruin that for you and say I'm a pantser, which is why it's hard to start the book, because some people see all these wonderful possibilities when they start a book. All I see are all the mistakes I could make and going down wrong ways and, you know, not having enough conflict, and because I don't plot it. You know, I start with 2 characters, and that said, I think about them a lot before I start the book. But, you know, I think about the characters, I think about their conflicts. I sometimes have a last scene in mind, although I rarely end up actually using that last scene, but it gives me something to write toward. And then I literally sit down and I write chapter 1, page 1, and I start. And it's like, and of course, your first thought is, did I start in the right place? I mean, there's like endless questions you ask yourself. So I find starting that first page terrifying. Now, once I get 5 pages in, then I'm like, oh, okay, I got this. This is fun. Now I'm cooking, you know, this is great. And then there's the sagging middle. That's always hard. But it's, yeah, I don't like starting books. It's terrifying to me.
And do you write like a linear story? Like you just sit down and you write like chapter by chapter, or do you get an idea for a future, for like a chapter down towards the end of the book and then write that and then come back to what you left?
Yeah, that's called quilting, interestingly enough, which I love that term. But no, I don't do that, because every time I do that, my story takes a turn away from whatever that scene is that I've written, you know, 3 chapters in the future or 6 chapters in the future, and I end up just throwing it away, which I hate doing, even though you have to. So I have to tell you, so I'm a pantser, not a plotter. I write by the seat of my pants. I tried once, because pantsing is very inefficient, obviously. You get a lot of detours, and it's just a crappy way to write a book. Terry's nodding away down there. So one time I decided, okay, we're going to be efficient. We're going to outline this book before I start. I'm outlining this book. So I outlined it all the way through, chapter by chapter. And I'm like, yes, this is going to be good. And so I start writing, and I get to chapter 3, and I'm like dragging my fingers on the keyboard and dragging my finger, and I'm like, ugh. And I stopped because I was bored, because I knew what was going to happen. So I write books the same way I read books. I write them to find out what's going to happen. Literally, that's how I do it. And that's what keeps me writing, because I want to know what's going to happen.
And do the characters speak to you and tell you what direction they're going? And if you have a plan, they take you in a different direction?
Oh yeah, all the time, all the time. Well, and you also, even though I've thought about the characters ahead of time, as I've said, as I write, I get to know them better. And all of a sudden I realized they wouldn't do those things that I thought they were going to do, because I know them more profoundly now, and I understand that that won't work for them. So yeah, but that's the fun of it. And I'm sure my fellow writers here know those moments where, what I love is when I've dropped in a little detail earlier in the book, and I have no idea why. I just put it in, I always say those little things are just for me, and I just put them in. And then all of a sudden I get 4 chapters down, and that detail triggers a whole new thought, train, or triggers a whole scene or something. I'm like, oh my God, I knew I would need that detail. But it's like in the subconscious. The girls in the basement is what Jenny Creasy calls them. Your subconscious. Are there these women down in the basement playing poker and smoking and drinking, and every now and then one of them stomps up to the top of the stairs, opens the door and goes, your character is going to do X. And then she slams the door and stomps back down the stairs again. And you're like, oh, my character is going to do X. I love it. It's so exciting. Those are the moments you live for as a writer.
Have you had any of those moments as you world build, and as you said, you knew different characters, at least 5 or 6 of them, you want to write the different stories. Are they speaking to you? Are you jotting down their thoughts, thoughts for their character down the road?
God, yeah. All the time. I dream about these characters, literally dream about them. But yeah, I just, while I'm cooking dinner, while I'm in the shower, I think about them. I mean, I'm so engrossed in this world that it's almost real to me. I'm teaching myself Spanish on Duolingo, the phone app, because I speak some French, but I don't know any Spanish. And I thought, if I'm writing about a world where the characters are Spanish speakers, they're trilingual, of course, just to make my life easier. They speak English, Spanish, and French on this island. So everybody can talk to each other, no problem. But still, I like to use little Spanish phrases just to get some local color. And I realized I don't really know how to use them properly. So this is how engrossed I am that I'm even learning a language that they speak and I don't. So much fun.
Sounds like it. It really does sound like you're having a blast. So I'm going to take you back to the early days and ask what your publishing journey was like.
Well, I started writing in the dark ages before self-publishing even existed. So I had a very traditional publishing journey. I finished A Bridge to Love. I spent a year trying to find an agent, found an agent, and then she sold it actually pretty quickly to Berkeley, which is part of what is now Penguin Random House. So they published my first 2 books. And then I got orphaned, which means that my editor left. So they didn't buy any more books for me because they didn't sell well enough for a new editor to take me on. And, then I've been publishing ever since in various ways. Most of my books are with Montlake, which is a division of Amazon Publishing, which is Amazon's own publishing house. It's not self-publishing. They have their own publishing house, just like Penguin Random House, etc. So the bulk of my books are with Montlake, who are wonderful.
And do they function the same way traditional publishing, or are they different?
They are mostly like a traditional publisher, except of course for the fact that they are also the world's biggest, most aggressive booksellers. So I have them not just publishing my books, but selling my books. And boy, is that a potent combination. So, I don't generally talk numbers, but I just hit a really big milestone. I have now sold over 1 million books.
Congratulations. Wow.
which even I said, wow, that's a lot of books. I don't look at my overall sales. Generally, I look at each book and how it's selling. And so to see that number was like, whoa. And that's just from Montlake. Those are just my Montlake books. So yeah, it really helps to have Amazon behind you.
And they buy books the same way, editor?
You need an agent. Yep. They buy, you get a contract, all that stuff, all the same things that a regular publisher does. I mean, they're a traditional publisher. They're just a little more innovative in some ways. So.
I mean, of course, I'm familiar with them from the library perspective, but wow, you just don't know. You're the first person who's told me a little bit more about how they function.
Yeah, they're great.
And And any other publishers? I don't recall if you, or those are your two. You did it, Berkeley and
Well, I was with a little tiny publisher for one book, but they're not even in business anymore. And honestly, I can't remember the name of it anymore. It was a while ago.
and how much input do you have in the choice of the title, the cover art, all of that?
Well, now that I'm with Montlake, I actually have a lot. When I was with Berkeley, I had zero. I mean, literally zero. But Montlake, so part of the advantage for me is I got in with Montlake very early in their business. You know, Amazon only started its publishing houses back in, I think it was 2010, 2009, and I signed with them in early 2011 or 12. Anyway, very early on. So I have a very good agent, and she negotiated a great contract with me. And one of the things I asked her to get in was veto power over covers, because after my experience with Berkeley, I was hypersensitive about that because I care deeply about my covers. Covers are really important. And so Montlake and I work very closely together on the covers, my editor and I. And as a result, I think I've gotten absolutely fantastic covers almost every time. And, you know, it's not always a painless process. I mean, it's interesting. So where is it? So the Money Man, they sent me the cover design and this was it. I mean, right off the bat, I was like, oh my God, it's perfect. I love it. It's beautiful. I mean, I think these are some of my best covers, this series, The Consultants. The Hacker, the first cover they sent me was really not good. But we worked it out and we got a really good, and I really like the Hacker cover now. So that's all good. As far as titles go, I am very much not wed to my titles because I've learned that they accept most of my titles, but that's a real marketing thing. And they do research to find out what titles have already been used recently, like the Money Man, great example. I wanted to call it The Financier, which was fine. And it turned out somebody had just published a book where that was the title. So they said, well, let's rename it. And I couldn't come up with anything good. So they said, how about The Money Man? I was like, oh, brilliant. I would have never come up with that. So I'm actually pretty, and they write all the blurbs, you know, the cover blurbs, that kind of thing, because they're just much better at that than I am. So I love, Montlake is great to work with. They really are. I've had such a good experience with them, and not just because of the numbers, but because they treat authors as partners, you know, and really try and work with you instead of sort of treating you like an annoying small child that they would like you to give them your book and then go away, which is the way a lot of publishers behave in my experience. So can't say enough good things about Montlake.
They sound really good, like a really good publisher, to be honest. What would you say to a new writer that's just starting out? And how important, because I'm going to mix these two questions, how important is a writer's group?
So I would say a couple of things to a new writer. The first thing I would say to them, and this is kind of depressing, but so many people I talk to need to be told this, don't expect to get rich from writing. People are so disappointed when they find out that most writers do not make very much money. And, you know, so I would just warn them about that. You need to write for love, not money. But on to the more fun stuff like craft, I would say read a ton and write a ton. So, and read across all genres. I mean, I read extensively. As I mentioned, I was reading science fiction, and that's where I got inspiration. Who would have thought, right, that science fiction would inspire romance? But it's good to be exposed to different kinds of literature. And then, of course, I read extensively in the romance genre because I want to see what the market is doing. I want to, well, I mean, number one, I love romance, so I read for pleasure. But I also read romance novels that I maybe would not gravitate toward because they're successful, and I want to see why, and, you know, that sort of thing. The big problem with being a romance writer and reading romance is I know too much now, so I kind of know all the tricks, and it's a little too, you know, I'm reading it more for work than for fun in a lot of cases. There are few authors I can read and just sit back and, like Susan Elizabeth Phillips, I just sit back and enjoy her books because I don't want to pick them apart. But but I read poetry, as I mentioned before. I read I read nonfiction, I read thrillers, I read everything. I like to read, period. And the other thing I think you have to do is write every day. I'm a big believer in that. Even if it's 25 words, you need to keep your head in your book every single day, because that's when the girls in the basement start yelling out things and saying, this is what your characters will want to do. You know, it keeps the subconscious working. So, you know, that's my advice.
And writers group.
Oh, right. Writers group. Sorry. Writers group. Can't say enough good things about writers groups either. I would not be where I am in my career if it was not for the New Jersey Romance Writers, yay, and Romance Writers of America. The amount of sharing of knowledge and experience that goes on in the romance world is just extraordinary. Everybody, you know, climbs the ladder and then reaches back down, and it's amazing to me. I understand that does not take place in most literary genres. So those groups have been extremely important to me. And then I am in a critique group, that came a little later in my career. I was a little afraid of critique groups because I've heard kind of scary stories about them, but I happened to be sitting beside Lisa Verge Higgins at a New Jersey Romance Writers meeting, and their critique group had just lost a member, and they were looking for a new one, and we started chatting. I didn't know her at all. She didn't know me at all. We just hit it off. And so a little while later, she invited me to join the group, and it's been an amazing group of women. I'm going to do a big shout out here. Shout out to Lisa Verge Higgins, Miriam Allenson, and Jennifer Welk for being the best critique partners in the world. They not only make my books better, but they've supported me in my personal life and in my career. So yes, invaluable. You need peeps. You definitely need peeps.
That sounds great. That sounds great. I want to, before I get to my last question, I want to turn it over and see if there are any questions from the audience. If you would mind typing it into the chat, and I will read it to Nancy, or she can read it also.
All right, the chat. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. I do like the covers. I have to admit, I've been very happy.
Gorgeous. And I'm going to give you, I have your sign up with here at the library. I can't keep your books next time. I like put a book next to it and then it's gone. And I have to go looking in the library. Has one come back? Where can I find? I mean, we have a bunch of them, and every time I put one there, it would disappear. So
Yay!
I have questions for you. What do you read when you're in full writing mode?
I'm pretty much always, with the exception of that 8 months where I couldn't write anything, I'm pretty much always in full writing mode. So I think what you're asking is, do I read romance when I'm in full writing mode? And you're right, I probably avoid it a little bit because you don't want other people's voices bleeding into your work, I guess. But I just read all the time. So I'm very eclectic in and if a book interests me, doesn't matter what kind it is, I'll just pick it up, you know, and start it. But one thing I will say, I've decided life is too short to read bad books. So if I get 25 pages into a book and I really don't like it, I stop. I mean, and I used to always finish books. So I'm like, nope, not wasting my time. Done.
Do you have a favorite author?
Oh, so many favorite authors, so many. So I mentioned Susan Elizabeth Phillips in romance, Georgette Heyer, you know, who's alas no longer with us. I love Louise Penny, who writes mysteries. I think her mysteries are brilliant. I actually like Lee Child's Jack Reacher books a lot. Oh, well, so the science fiction series that I fell in love with is the Vorkosigan saga by Louise McMaster Bujold. And it was so funny. I had never heard of it. I'd heard of her, but I'd never heard of it. And I don't even remember how I picked up the first one. But then I discovered there are a ton of people who love that series. I posted about it on Facebook, and like, I got all these comments going, oh yeah, he's my book boyfriend, and da-da-da. I'm like, oh my God, there's this whole world out there. I loved it. So I don't know, those are just a few. Oh, Marco Cluse, he's somebody I just discovered who writes military science fiction, I think it's called. I don't even know what all the subgenres are, but I love his characters. So tons of different favorite authors.
Oh, Stephanie's asking, how soon will the new series launch?
Yeah, I knew someone was going to ask me that. I don't know. So here's the complicating factor. I'm almost done with this first book. but it's not the end of this couple's story, because I did so much world building and I have so many secondary characters. I couldn't actually finish their story in one book. So I'm going to have to write another book to finish their story. And I don't know, you know, to be fair to readers, I mean, you guys tell me this. Do you want me to publish this book first and make you wait for the second book? Or, you know, how, I feel like they need to be published together. So it may take a while. And I also do not know if Montlake will buy these books. I'm writing these are on spec without a contract. And since they're different from what I usually do, I'm not sure how my editor will feel about it. I haven't asked her. I haven't shown them to anyone yet except my critique group. So I haven't shown it. So the answer to that is, I have no idea, Stephanie. I'm sorry. As soon as I can do it. So let's see. So Elke stops at 40 pages when she doesn't like a book. You're much more generous than I am. Stephanie says, I love that you create families of the heart. Well, they're my heart, right? So absolutely. Yeah, some people are not fond of cliffhangers. I don't want to, this isn't going to end on a cliffhanger exactly, but their relationship is not resolved at the end of this book. And if it's going to be a romance, you kind of need to resolve the relationship. So yeah. So Elke said it also leaves you room for changes when, yeah, exactly, Elke. Because then if I've messed something up in this book, I can fix it first. Good point.
If Montlake doesn't Lena's asking if Montlake doesn't accept these books, would you consider self-publishing them?
Absolutely, Lena. In fact, I think that's what I would do, is self-publish them. I hope my loyal readership will still find me if I do that. You know, obviously I won't have the powerhouse of Amazon behind me for the marketing, and that's a little scary, but I think self-publishing would be the way to go, rather than, I'm so spoiled working with Montlake. I don't think I could work with another traditional publisher, honestly. I would be very grumpy about that. So any other questions? I'm here. Ask me, pepper me.
I have the fun question that I left on your website. I noticed that you enjoy traveling and have been to many interesting locales. Can you tell us about going to Paris for the Festival de Roman Féminin?
Wow. I mean, come on, it was Paris. What's not to love about that? That was so much fun. I was so excited when they invited me to that. So it's a group called Les Romantiques that run the festival. And they, you know how romance gets slammed in the media in the US? Well, evidently it's 10 times worse in France, you know, because the French are a little bit of snobs, as we know, cultural snobs. So these people were just so excited. All these readers are so excited to be there and to be able to talk about romance with other people who loved romance and weren't ashamed of loving romance. And it was just, you know, such a level of energy that was marvelous. And while I speak some French, when I was doing panels, I don't have the specialized vocabulary to talk about writing and romance writing. So I had a translator. I felt like, you know, the Secretary of State or something. I had a translator. That was so cool. And fortunately, I could understand what they were saying to me. So they didn't have to translate what the question was, but they had to translate my answer. So that was fun. I got to hang out with my French editor and my translator because they've published the Wager of Hearts books are now published in France. This is Le Boss, which is the CEO buys in. It's the first book. They have great covers in France too. I really love these. Unfortunately, these were not out at the time I went to the festival, so I had to take English, you know, editions, but people were excited about getting those. So, and then of course I spent several days after the festival and wandered around Paris, because why wouldn't you? And I'm very excited because next May, I'm actually going to Edinburgh to do the Rare event, which was supposed to be in 2020, but we all know what happens to that. And I've never been to Scotland, and Scotland is my roots. You know, Herkness, my last name, is Scottish. And according to family legend, the Herknesses lived down near the English border of Scotland, and we used to go across the border and steal English sheep and take them back to Scotland. So maybe not the fanciest family, but hey, you know, I feel like I will, you know, absorb the vibes through the soil when I set foot in Scotland. And besides, men in kilts. So yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Sounds really like, it's sad that the French don't embrace romance, but
I know. I guess it doesn't really surprise me though, because I mean, think of all the trouble we have here, and we're much more into pop culture in the US than the French are. So yeah, I had great sympathy for those readers and just really embraced them, and they embraced me. It was just so much fun. So highly recommend it if you can go there. So I see there's some more questions. Shall I answer these? Oh, Stephanie, thank you for saying that. That's so nice of you. I love being on a keeper shelf. That's like the ultimate compliment. Lena asked, do I ever write poetry now? No, I don't. I read it a lot, but I spend too much time writing novels, I guess. All my creative energy seems to go into that. Kind of miss writing poetry. Stephanie asked, would you write in another genre? And if yes, what would it be? Wow. Science fiction, well, or maybe fantasy, world building. You know, I'm all into world building now, so I think I would do that. That would be fun. Fantasy would be fun. I want to write about dragons. I really do. I just love dragons. So I'm thinking definitely. So has anybody here read The Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey? Oh, yeah. I loved those when I was young. So something like that would be a lot of fun. However, I probably won't. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe I'll get so excited, you know, after I finish this series, the Kaleva series, that I will branch off into Dragon Riders of Kaleva or something. Who knows?
always
Oh
magical.
yeah, you still have copies of the Dragon Riders of Pern? That's neat.
I think there's always magical realism. You could just like inject a little bit of magic into your contemporary.
Well, so my Whisper Horse series has a little bit of woo-woo in it, because you know everybody in that book, in that series, the sort of theme was that everyone has a whisper horse that they can tell their troubles to, and there's one particular horse. You know, it's not like you can't just do it with any horse. So the and the owner of the stable where the horses live truly believes in that. And I never really resolved whether it was, you know, a psychological thing or a magical thing. I let people interpret it the way they wanted to, because I'm not sure either, you know. So what were the science fiction book series you read, and who is the author? The one that I liked so much, Shirley, it was Lois McMaster Bujold, Bujold, and the series is called the Vorkosigan Saga. And I'm trying to remember what the first one, I can't remember what the first book is called. It's a big series. I think there may be 16 books in it or something.
Any more questions? Anyone? Nancy, I can't thank you enough for joining us this evening. It's been a wonderful conversation, a wonderful chat. And I definitely look, my background's Spain. My family comes from Spain. So I'm looking forward to
Very cool.
I was like, oh, I have to find out about that. So I'm looking forward to your next books, and I wish you much success with this series with the New Jersey Romance Writers, those two finalists in those two categories.
Thank you.
Good luck. And thank you again for joining us this evening, to everyone. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everyone for coming. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. You know, if I can't see you in person, this is almost as good. So yeah, thanks a million, Janette. Great questions too.
Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody. Take care. Be safe. Love you guys. Mwah.